Hey, good morning, Washington Heights Church. Welcome to those watching online and also our folks at Weber County Jail tuning in as well.
Hey, I'm Pastor Jimmy.
And I'm Pastor Mike.
Hopefully when you came in, you got a bulletin, a program. In that bulletin and program is a connection card. We love to hear from each one of you, so take a moment, fill it out, and then drop in the offering as it goes by.
That's right, and it's a great way for us to be able to stay connected with you and be involved in part of your lives. At each one of our exits after service, if you were a new first-time guest checking us out for the first time, we want to give you a little gift. It's a simple little book called How Good is Good Enough. Just a thank you from us to you for being with us today.
Hey, buddy, what are you doing? That is a lot of food and a big drink.
Did you know the Bible says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst?
Really? Well, there's a little more to that. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but it's blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. We need to slow it down.
Oh.
Hey, buddy, how's it going over there?
Man, feels pretty good practicing being humble.
I love what the Bible says. Blessed are those who are humble. I think I'm the most humble.
Well, everyone, we're in a new series called Be Happy, and it's a look at some of the teachings of Jesus and what he taught about what it means to be truly happy. Let's hear what Pastor Roy has to say about it.
You look hungry. You gotta get some of it down, man.
I've got so much in my mouth.
Hey, buddy, how's it going in there?
I can't get it out. I can't get it out.
It's kind of hard to know what to say after that, isn't it? We're in a series entitled Be Happy, which is ironic. The week after, as a lifelong Cowboy fan, I gloated about them winning last week, and, well, yesterday, not so much. And so one of the things that we're learning, and all I have to say about that game is, when does baseball start? That's what I want to know at this point. But we're learning that happiness, the way that Jesus describes it, is not tied to the circumstances that happen around us. It doesn't happen from the outside in, but rather it happens from the inside out. Did you know that every year the United Nations publishes a happiness report? And every country in the world gets scored on their level of happiness. And there's a whole bunch of different facets that go into that. And hey, I want to invite you to do something. Why don't you turn to somebody next to you, see if you can guess who came in, number one, the happiest country in the world. See if you can figure it out. All right. Let me give you the results. I'll give you the top 5 happiest countries in the world. Finland. Anybody have Finland in here? Norway, Denmark, Iceland, and Switzerland, which apparently means you need a cold, dark winter to be able to be happy in this world. I don't know if anybody picked the United States. You probably know that was a little bit of a setup, that it wasn't us. And where are we on that list? Number 18. And I'll tell you what, that number year by year has been declining. Think about this. We live in a country where when it was founded, we had, this ideal in mind, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And even that vocabulary, that phrase makes it sound something like this, that we have to go get it. We have to go find it, and it's out there somewhere waiting for us to discover it, to enter into it, as if we got to get ourselves there. And it happens circumstantially. It happens outside of ourselves. And we began last week by taking a look at what is called the Beatitudes in the New Testament. It's the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount given by Jesus. And what's a beatitude? That's a really strange word. That simply means a declaration of blessing. And the word that we're going to see, God blesses those. That word blesses has the idea of being happy, of being favored, of being a blessed person. And here's what we already began to discover last week, and I think we're going to see it on full display today in the two Beatitudes that we look at. That it's not an outside-in deal, but rather Jesus targets these human hearts of ours. He looks at things inside of ourselves and tells us that to be in that place of being blessed, of being happy, that is not tied to the circumstances around us, it starts in here and works its way out. And that there can be a sense of joy that is there regardless of the circumstances. Picture Jesus as the master of life, the master of the human heart, who understands us better than we even understand ourselves. And there are times and ways in which what he does is he challenges us with the ways that are often thought and understood here in this world. And there will be, you can count on it, moments in a journey either toward Jesus or with Jesus where you will be challenged to let go of some of the beliefs that are not on the same page as God's agenda. And you will be challenged to maybe let go of some of the prejudices that are not the expression of the heart and the character of God. He's the master of life. And that's not always understood for what it is. I heard this story, it's a true story, happened about 100 years ago. And we probably know the name Henry Ford. You know, he was, the inventor of the automobile and all of that. And they, built this factory and had a assembly line and all of that. Well, there was a time when Henry Ford's assembly line wasn't working the way that it should. And he had all of his people working on it, and they just couldn't figure it out. But there was some machinery that was not working right. Well, he found out that there was this brilliant man, an engineer, a scientist. His name was Charles Steinmetz, and this is what he looked like. And so Henry Ford goes to Charles Steinmetz and says, hey, I want to hire you and bring you in. I understand that you are just, this brilliant engineer. You can come and try to figure out what's not working because it is not working and we cannot solve it. So Charles Steinmetz shows up at this factory and he asks for a cot and a notebook and a pencil, and he refuses all help from anybody else. And he spends 2 days and 2 nights there listening to machinery, scribbling notes to himself and all of that. And then finally, at the end of those 2 days, he asks for a ladder, climbs up on the side of one of those huge machines, takes a piece of chalk and puts an X mark, and he says, take off this panel, replace the coils in here, and everything will be fixed. And some of the people who had been working on this problem were like, yeah, I don't think so. That's not where the problem is. He says, that's where the problem is. They decided to listen to him. They take that panel off there. They replace the coils. And you know what? The machine functioned flawlessly. And all of a sudden, things were back to normal. And then, all was good until Henry Ford got the bill from Charles Steinmetz. And the bill was for $10,000. Now, that doesn't sound a whole lot in our day, but 100 years ago, that was a huge amount of money. And so Henry Ford is a little bit, offended and somewhat curious about that bill. And so he sends back a letter to Charles Steinmetz, says, hey, could you itemize that bill for me? Because he wants to see, that huge expense broken down. Charles Steinmetz sends back an itemized bill, and this is the way that it read. Cost for making a chalk mark, $1. Knowing where to put the chalk mark, $9,999. Right? The master knows, and there are many times we might even be skeptical about what the master knows. But Jesus is the master of life and the master of the human heart. And he understands things about us that we don't even know about ourselves. And there will come times when there is a challenge to what we think, what we believe, and what happens in those moments is a crucial part of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. So let's take a look at a couple of Beatitudes there, unpack them, and then we're going to see this in action. God blesses those, or happy are those, who are humble or meek. And I think we get the upside of humble, but the word that's used there is not the normal word for humble. It's actually a word that is more often than not translated meek. For they will inherit the whole earth. Now again, I think we know that humble has a positive side to that, but my guess is the word meek to us isn't really a positive word. Right? Meek equals weak. Right? We say meek as a mouse. That's not a compliment, right? That's more of a slur to somebody. If your place of employment was looking for a new leader, a new CEO, we might list a whole series of criteria of what's being looked for. Do you think meek would make the list? When we think of meek, we probably have this image in our mind of like a Barney Fife, if anybody who knows who that is. And if you don't know who that is, just ask your parents because they will know who that is. And we think of somebody who is, just pathologically passive. They don't have a will of their own. Everybody just walks all over them. They really don't know much about anything, and they're certainly, not going to challenge anything. But words change meaning over time. And the word meek that was used by Jesus on that day was translated in a couple different contexts back in that day outside of the Bible. It was used for getting a wild stallion, a wild horse, and breaking it or taming it. And that pictures for us this idea that you take something of power and it doesn't lose its power, but now that power is under control. It has given a purpose and a direction that it did not have before. Before it was just wild. But now it's focused. And now it's helpful. And now it's got a direction to go. The other way that word was used was for a medicine that would help to alleviate a fever that was raging. And so it also gets this idea that there is a good influence that is helpful, that is beneficial. So to be meek is not this idea of weak. It doesn't mean to just be a doormat. It's this idea of power under control. And when it comes to God and what it means to be meek is to be recognized that, hey, it's not anything goes as far as I determine it, but rather it is somebody who is willing to recognize that I need to bend the knee because there is a God who is over me and He has an agenda and I need to be on His agenda. And I need to belong to Him and express the direction and the purpose for which He put me here in the first place. So to paraphrase this idea, it could sound like this: blessed are those who submit to God as Lord. Lord can also mean leader, for they will inherit everything He possesses. Then there's a second beatitude. God blesses those who hunger and thirst for justice, or it could be righteousness, for they will be satisfied. And the idea of hungering and thirsting, those are two of just the base essential elements of being alive. And we probably know that if we're lacking those, there would be a sense of desperation in us, and we would continue to pursue those regardless of what stood in our way, because we know without a shadow of a doubt, I need that. And that's what will keep me alive. But Jesus takes that idea and He turns it that there can be this sense of awareness and this sense of persistence to hunger and thirst, to long after the things of God. But many times what we can do is we can long for the things of God, and then when it doesn't happen, like in a microwave second, we just kind of turn and go in a different direction altogether. But could it be that a relationship with God is not just about what I ask for and what I think I need and then either getting that or not? That rather there is a journey, a relationship that takes place there where the human heart can learn all the more as time goes on to trust the God who is behind, understanding us better than we know ourselves. And that it's as much about the journey as it is about the destination. But what it will require is an awareness of how much the things of God matter to us and how at various times we will need to stay engaged and continue to be persistent, and it would be so easy to walk away. because what we thought we needed, what we asked for, hasn't been given in the spur of the moment. If we're going to paraphrase this, maybe we could say it this way: blessed are those, or happy are those who passionately long for Christ, for he will satisfy their souls. Now here's what I'm convinced of. For all of us, me included, it's a whole lot easier to read these, to talk about them, to unpack them like that, and to say, yeah, you know what, that's right, that's good. It's a whole different ballgame when we get to us and our lives and real life. Have you ever noticed that not everything that we learn is done with a notebook in hand and a pencil or pen in the other hand, and we're writing some things down? That a lot of the things that we learn in life happen in real life with real people. And Jesus, was just brilliant with this. And he had these disciples around him for 3 years, and so often he would teach them with real life kind of experiences like, here we go, and let's have this unfold in real time. And so with those two Beatitudes as a backdrop, I want to take a little bit of a case study for us in one of the days in the life of Jesus and the disciples. And I think we'll see these Beatitudes on full display of what it means to be blessed by being meek, power under control, blessed by hungering and thirsting for justice, for the things of God, and persisting in that. It's an odd story. It's a challenging story. And I think one of the aspects of faith that we often downplay is that God may, at various times, challenge us with things that we don't even see inside of ourselves at that moment. And he may well draw that X mark somewhere on my heart or your heart through the story that unfolds. So, let's check it out. Then Jesus left Galilee and went north to the region of Tyre and Sidon. He's been doing a whole bunch of healing and teaching, and he's getting away from the crowds for the most part. And he's going to a region called Tyre and Sidon. And if you know anything about there from the Bible, these are long-standing enemies. There's a lot of animosity that goes back and forth here. And in the minds of the disciples, no doubt they're thinking, to be in Tyre and Sidon, that's strike one. Those are the people that are just on a totally different page than God. They don't, for the most part, know the God that we know of the Bible. They have all their gods, and they are just very different in beliefs and customs and everything. And we have been at odds with them for a long time. Well, what happens there? A Gentile woman, and so if Tyre and Sidon was strike one, Gentile is strike two, woman is strike three. That's just the way society functioned back then. Now remember, Jesus came to change a whole lot of that. But those lessons don't always come easily. And what we truly believe deep down in our hearts isn't always just simply set aside. A Gentile woman who lived there came to him as Jesus, pleading, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David, for my daughter is possessed by a demon that torments her severely." And we can just imagine what that experience must have been like for that mother. And anybody, who's cared about anybody knows that when somebody that you care about is in a bad place, you've got this awareness of how much that matters, and you just want to see them helped. And she comes to Jesus, and she is deeply respectful. She calls him Lord. Lord is a title of respect. It is that idea that she is saying that you are over all things. That's, what that means, including me. She uses that phrase, Son of David. It means that she knows something about the God of the Bible and recognizes, that he's got some place in that. So this is a respectful approach with a very clear and urgent need, and it's not one of those things where she's just asking for some, little bit more of convenience in her life. This is somebody who matters so much to her. And we would say, you know what, that's just a clear case of, yeah, go ahead and do that, Jesus. Because the Jesus that we probably all know, is on the side of right and not on the side of wrong. And that's why Jesus in this story seems a little bit confusing. Look at this. But Jesus gave her no reply, not even a word. You find that a little curious? That it seems like either Jesus is not listening, or that he's indifferent and doesn't care. about her? But could it be on this day, Jesus, as the master teacher and also the master of life, is at work teaching lessons to the woman? But you remember who else is there? The disciples. About what it means to live out and express the character and the nature of God. And he's going to challenge some of that. Now, no doubt the disciples think, yeah, that's right. You know what? No self-respecting rabbi in our day talks to a foreigner or talks to a woman in that setting. So what Jesus is doing, that's perfectly normal. We understand that, and what he's doing is right. She shouldn't even be here in the first place. So, of course, what he is doing is right. In fact, they back him up. Then his disciples urged him to send her away. Tell her to go away, they said. She is bothering us with all this begging. Do you find it a little interesting that she came to Jesus and made a request of him, but they say she's bothering us? Methinks thou overestimates thyself in this moment. It's like, he's not bothering you, but it's like, yeah, Jesus, get this riffraff out of here. This is not the first time the disciples have been in that place so far from God's agenda. There was a day when a whole bunch of children come to Jesus and they're like, get these kids out of here. And in that day, that was the way that everybody thought, because kids, until they actually brought some value into the home, were not considered objects of value like they are today. But Jesus says, no, let the little children come. There was another day, they're walking through a Samaritan village, and boy, if Tyre and Sidon was on their bad people page, the Samaritans were that all the more, and they were treated horribly in there. And as they exit that, they turn to Jesus and they say, hey, can we call down fire from heaven and wipe them out? And Jesus on that day says, oh, you don't understand the Father's heart. Yeah, that wasn't good, but that's not an expression of God's heart. And on this day, tell her to go away. She is bothering us with all of her begging. And you know, it's one thing, isn't it, to criticize somebody maybe internally, inside of our minds, to have that internal dialogue. But it's another thing to say it out loud and actually give voice to what it is that we believe. And it's one thing for us, you know, to see a category of those people and just put everybody who is in that category under that banner and just write them off. But it's a whole different thing to be face to face with somebody and to recognize that this is a real person. Right? We don't have these same kind of categories in our day, but have you ever had this emotion or this internal dialogue, and I'm maybe preach more to myself here in the next couple minutes than anybody else, but you're driving along and you see somebody sitting at a corner or at a traffic light and they're holding up a sign, and to think, you know what, they're just lazy and you need to get a job. But it's a whole different thing to sit down with somebody and recognize there's a whole host of different reasons why somebody could be there. It's one thing to talk about, you know, somebody with an addiction and just think, well, they just are weak-willed. And if they could just pull themselves together, you know, they'd get over that. But it's different to sit down with somebody and talk about what led up to that and how difficult it is to get that 900-pound gorilla off your back. And on this day, we see the disciples talking about things that they believe out loud. And from their perspective at this moment, they think, well, that's just the way it is. And of course, we're on the right side of this issue. And look, Jesus didn't even give her a response. Here's what happens next. Then Jesus said to the woman, I was sent only to help God's lost sheep, the people of Israel. Now that's a curious statement, because there are many other times Jesus has made it much more global than that. Jesus has already said before this day, you know, that God so loved the world that he sent his one and only Son. So if you love the world, why on this day are you saying you've come to only serve the lost sheep? All of a sudden, you're making it narrow. You're saying it's just Israel. And what you're saying to this woman who is not in that category is, that doesn't include you. And that's kind of a picture of Jesus that if we just read this, we think, man, I'm not sure I like this picture of Jesus. But the Master is at work, giving voice to what it is that his disciples have already expressed. You're with us. She's one of them. Send her away. And Jesus, I picture this, is looking at his disciples, saying out loud what they have believed in their hearts. And sometimes it's a challenge for us to be confronted with some of the darkness and the ugliness that lives inside of us. And we don't like the way that it sounds. It's a whole lot easier to just get together with those who agree with us and we all nod our heads in the same direction and say, yeah, that's right, we're right. But Jesus speaks what we often think, and the prejudices that we often hold, and the beliefs that are so far from the agenda of God don't sound so good when they're said in front of somebody who's right there. And what Jesus is doing right now is he's putting a chalk mark on the hearts of his disciples, challenging them to get onto God's agenda. And you know, one day that will be the reality, but it's not going to be on this day. It's going to take a crucifixion and a resurrection, and to be on the other side of that to say, now I get it. Now I get it. And what God is doing is for everybody. But on this day, nope, their categories are narrow. And Jesus is saying out loud what they think and what they believe. And what about her? You know, she's hearing this too, and you know, he's got this dynamic where she's there and the disciples are there. Surely she must just pick up her stuff and head back where she came from, because what she asked for has not been granted, and it didn't seem like he was listening. And now he said, hey, here's the category, and you're on the outside looking in. Look at what she does. But she came and worshiped him, pleading again, Lord, help me. She's not going anywhere. What does it mean to be meek? Power under control, given a purpose and a direction. What does it mean to hunger and thirst for justice, for righteousness, to persist in the things of God? And both of those things are playing out in this moment. And right now, she's hungering and thirsting. Probably she has that sense of desperation. I got nowhere else to go. But she recognizes this is where my help comes from. Jesus responded, and again, this is kind of an interesting response. It isn't right to take food from the children and throw it to the dogs. And you know what? Dogs then were not like dogs now, where we'll pay $100 to get their hair done right somewhere. Dogs were viewed as scavengers and garbage eaters and those who contained disease. To refer to somebody as a dog was not a positive thing. It was not a compliment. And again, Jesus giving words to beliefs held by his followers who have a long way to go to get on the same page as God's agenda. And we have to think, man, after that, she's got to just head out. This is going from no answer to bad to worse. She replied, that's true, Lord, but even the dogs are allowed to eat the scraps that fall beneath their master's table. That's a great comeback. And she uses the word dogs as well, but she uses a slightly different version of it. It's kind of like we would say doggy or pooch or something like that. And here's what, she's saying in essence, okay, Jesus, you feed the children. But those children, when they eat, they're kind of messy. And some stuff falls from that table. And surely there must be just a crumb for me. That's good. She's still there. And I wonder if in the hearts and the minds of his disciples in this moment, they're scratching their heads thinking, why is she still here? What does she see in him? She hasn't gotten what she asked for. He's been on the same page with us this whole time. Why is she still here? God blesses those who hunger and thirst for justice, for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. She stays engaged. My guess is every person in this room knows the reality of asking for something. In our own minds, it's not a matter of convenience. It is something of great importance to us. And it's as if God is not listening, or God has taken his time, or we're not sure what's going on, but we haven't received what it is that we needed and what it is that we asked for. And how easy it is in those moments to just get up and walk away, to leave and to say, well, I guess that doesn't work. Or maybe there's something wrong with me. There's a lesson from this woman to stay engaged, to hunger and thirst for what only God can provide, to persist in pursuing what only God can do. So she's still there. And finally, the masks come off in this story. And Jesus says, dear woman, and that is a great term of endearment. Jesus said to her, your faith is great. Your request is granted. And her daughter was instantly healed. I don't know how long that took, but it sure wasn't on her timetable. So now the grades are being handed out by Jesus. She gets an A+. Anybody want to guess at the grade for the disciples in this story? Not so good. They should have studied more. But not all lessons are learned with a notebook and a pen. Some of them are learned in real life with real people. And in this moment, what Jesus has done is really exposed her heart and theirs and the disciples. A couple lessons from this story. Who is Jesus? Jesus is the king, not a consultant. He is the one to whom every single one of us, we need to recognize that there is a moment where we bend the knee. There is one who is over us. And he is not here for me. I am here for him. He doesn't need to get on my agenda. I need to get on his agenda. And that's not always easy. It's easy to say. It's harder to do. Because chances are, every single one of us in some of those dark parts of our hearts, there's some beliefs that are not on God's page, maybe even some prejudices that do not express the heart of God. And there are times and ways in which he'll challenge us about that. And also, righteousness begins as a gift and becomes a journey. How does anybody get right with God? It's his gift. It's his doing. It's by grace. Grace is God's undeserved favor. And he just pours it out on us. But we might be inclined to think, well, isn't that great? And God, go ahead, just kind of plop it all down in my lap. But there's an aspect to a relationship with God where it is a journey where, like this woman, we're going to have to grapple and wrestle with some of the things that don't make sense to us in that moment of time. But we understand that God is up to maybe so much more than we can even see in that moment. And it isn't always just about me. That there might be other things that God is up to. But will I trust him? Will I trust him in the moments that seem like he's not listening? That seems like he's taking his time? That seems like he's got a much narrower category than we hoped? It begins as a gift. But then there's this journey, this relationship. And there are times we need to stay engaged. To hunger and thirst, a sense of desperation that only God has, what ultimately I need. The path to happiness challenges you before it changes you. And it's a whole lot simpler to talk about it than it is to do it. And the process of transformation, we wish it was just a snap of a finger, like flicking on a light switch. But with the disciples, with this woman, there were moments of instruction by the Master, of challenge by the one who understands us better than we know ourselves. And eventually, God is able to transform these hearts of ours. And more, His heart is expressed. And less, these hearts of ours. Because all on our own, none of us can experience what God has for us. Only He can do that work. I'm going to invite you to bow your heads together with me as I pray. God, thank you for who you are. A God not only of great grace, but also a God who is a master of life, master of the human heart. And God, I pray that inside of every one of us there'd be an acknowledgement of the things that we do not know, even the things that we don't know, and our ultimate need and dependence on you. So God, do your work in us so that more and more we are on your page, your agenda, and less would we live for and express what naturally resides in these hearts of ours. God, we need you. So we thank you for times like this and all the times, especially those even in real life, that you use to transform us. Lead us in the direction that you have for us, and we thank you for your many blessings along the way. We ask and pray in Jesus' name, amen.